Hello, this is another version of this particular presentation for people who are struggling to get onto the link for the first version. And I'll try and make it a little bit quicker, but also to work in some of the ideas from the last class that we ran out of time to cover when the library team turned up to talk to you about referencing and so forth. So this is just some guidance on how to go about conducting your observation for the practice piece that you're presenting on Thursday. Now, as has been said in class a couple of times, if you find a safe place, a sensible place to go to, could be somewhere out of doors, a park, for example, or it could be an indoor venue, a cafe, a pub, a library, somewhere like that, where you are allowed to go along to. So it's a public place, and at a time of day and a day of the week when it's safe to do so. So obviously not 3 a.m, in a dark alleyway, but somewhere safe and sensible where you can observe people coming and going. Now, it doesn't have to be a very large number of people, just see who comes out along, see what they do for the space of about 30 to 60 minutes, round about that. And you're not trying to interview them, you're not trying to talk to them, you're just sitting quietly in a corner, minding your own business, and just jotting down a few notes on a tally sheet about what kind of people turn up and roughly what they do. If it is a very, very busy place with loads of people, more than you can reasonably observe, then make a decision to narrow it down. So you might only observe what the men do, or only observe what the women do, or only observe what the teenagers do, or what the elderly people do. So you could kind of narrow your field down if it's a very, very busy place. But keep track of those sorts of issues that you think will be interesting and which you feel you can link into theory. So a little bit of demographic detail, ratios of men and women, ratios of different age groups turning up and what they do. You could keep track of roughly how long a period of time they spend doing activities if you've got a mind to, if you think that would be an interesting element, but it's not absolutely necessary to keep track of time spans, more so to keep track of who turns up and what they do. So just to reiterate, somewhere safe, somewhere you can just sit quietly in a corner, and you've got your tally sheet prepared ahead of time, like a grid with a few boxes on it, where you can note male or female, where you can note rough age groups, where you can scribble down a detail of what they do, or indeed you've decided ahead of time probably the kinds of things they're likely to do, and then you could just sort of tick off as you go along how many times those particular activities happen. I'll show you an example of a tally sheet in just a second. I am including presumption here because obviously if it's gender, not everyone identifies as either male or female, and sometimes it's not always obvious what they identify as, so you're going to have to take a guess. As the people will never know you're observing them, they're in no position to be offended by you guessing incorrectly. Likewise, if you're guessing their age group, you might add on a few years or take off a few years by accident, but they're not going to be in a position to know you got it wrong or be offended by your guess as to what age they are. You could keep track of things like ethnicity as well if you think that's relevant. If you don't think it's relevant, then there's no need to bother, because it's more behaviour that you're looking at rather than those kind of factors. So this is an example of a sheet. So let's imagine somebody's sitting in the park and watching the world go past, and they note that for 20 minutes a man came along who looked to be somewhere in his 20s or early 30s. He sat on a park bench, and for a few minutes he fed peanuts or whatever it was to the squirrels and engaged with the wildlife. And then an elderly lady came along, and she was looking at the flowers and smelling the roses as she went past for 10 minutes or so, and so forth. So you'd be keeping track of those kinds of details as to who does what. You're not trying to get close enough to people to be able to hear their conversations, like the woman on the phone call. You're not trying to spy upon what she's actually saying. You're just noting the fact that she made a phone call. That's sufficient in and of itself without needing to know what she said or who she was talking to or anything like that. So you're just keeping track, and then when you get home after your observation, then you convert that into a table. Now, you could do it as a slide on PowerPoint, or you could just print out a sheet and pass it around the class so that we can all have a look at what the data is, what the numbers are. That should only take you a few minutes to cover in your presentation. Just, I went along to this place on that day at such and such a time, and I was there for an hour, and here's a list of the things I saw going on. Take a couple of minutes. Most of your presentation should be taken up with you applying theory. Relevant theories to explain what went on and why it was going on. Now, we quite briefly touched on Gibson's affordances in class just before the librarians came along. So to recap that, Gibson's argument is that not only humans but all sorts of other animals make use of places. They go to specific places in the belief that they will be able to utilize those places in ways they want. So they may go to a particular river because they know there's always water there and the water's fresh and they can drink it safely without getting horrible diseases or getting eaten by a crocodile or something melodramatic. They may go to a particular part of the woods because they know there's a fruit tree growing there and they can get something to eat. We can engage in behaviors like that. Now, that's not just creatures in forests and mountains and fields and whatnot. It's the built environment as well. So we might, if we're feeling lonely, we might go down the pub because we know there's lots of chatty people down there and we can get into conversation with someone. But equally, if we feel that we'd actually like a bit of peace and quiet, instead of going to a pub, you might go to the library. Because yes, you could get a book out, which is obviously the main use of a library, but you can also just sit in a corner quietly and read it or pretend to read it at any rate for 10, 20 minutes, however long you want, just to get some peace and quiet away from a very noisy environment elsewhere. So one environment lends itself, affords opportunities for peace. Another environment affords opportunities for socialization and chit-chat. So you can understand that people might go to a place because they hope to be able to do a certain activity when they get there. Or maybe indeed they hope to avoid doing certain activities that they're trying to get away from somewhere else by going to this place. So whether it's you watching people in the park or you watching people down the pub or watching people in a cafe or a library or wherever it may be, think about why they're going there. What is it that they hope to get from that place? Do they get it? Well, you wouldn't necessarily know for definite if they get it or not, but you can look at the activities they're engaging in as to why they might be going to that place to do that activity. Perhaps people go jogging in the park because it's safer than jogging along the roadside. They're less likely to be hit by a car, and they don't have to be inhaling all of the petrol fumes from the cars. They can go and wander, jog around the park, and it's perhaps healthier for their lungs, that kind of thing. Prashansky's ideas around emotional attachment and identity might be a bit harder to establish just by watching because you don't necessarily understand the emotional states the person is in if it's not very obvious. You don't necessarily know if they're a first-time visitor or a frequent visitor, so you wouldn't automatically be able to make a guess, a stab at that level of engagement. But there may be some elements to which you could make a fair guess that this place might hold a significance to some of the people that you're observing due to the way they behave, or do they look very familiar with the place? Do they look like they know exactly what they're doing and where they're going, or are they wandering around looking a bit lost because maybe this is the very first time they've ever been there? So you can make fair guesses about those sorts of things. Now, we haven't got onto the Kaplans in class yet, but you might well have read about them in books as you're doing your background research and reading. They developed attention restoration theory, ART, to argue that there are certain places of natural beauty, forests and mountains and beaches and so on, where people go because it's so beautiful. They can sit, they can chill, they can relax, and just the very nature of the place calms them down. And when they leave, they feel happier and healthier and less anxious, and that their mind is calm, they feel restored, and they're often much better at performing on cognitive tasks when they get back home or back to work or wherever it is that they're going afterwards. And so it could be, if you're in a park or somewhere like that doing your observation, you see people chilling out, resting, relaxing, kind of de-stressing from their day at work or their day looking after screaming kids or whatever it is that they've been up to, and they're using it in that way. Scopoliti we'll get on to in a future class, but Scopoliti made a very similar sort of argument about built environments. So he said that not only are forests and mountains and so on very beautiful, but there are art galleries and cathedrals and museums and all sorts of places like that, which are just stunning architecture. They're very beautiful places. And they also have this restorative effect. So it's not only people going to the woods, it might be people going to an art gallery or going to a church or somewhere that's just very beautiful to be in, so they can sit and chill and relax and find their mental centre once again. It could be that there's elements of Maslow's hierarchy coming in, which you've probably done with Louise, I guess, in your social developmental classes. So at the bottom are the physiological needs, cafeterias and pubs and places that serve food and drink and have toilets and so on, so you can meet your bodily needs. But above that, you've got things like safety needs. Maybe people go to a particular place because they feel safe there. They're fairly sure they're not going to be attacked or beaten up or threatened or anything like that. They feel calm and they feel at peace and they feel okay there. Then you've got things like intellectual needs. They may be going to a bookshop or a library or a place where they can have like a college, for example, where they can have a lot of intellectual banter and stimulation and get their brains working, and so on up the list of Maslow's hierarchy. So it may be that the place you're looking at lends itself to one or two or three, however many, of Maslow's set of needs, that people appear to be meeting certain needs in that place. So here's a little mini presentation from me. I'll do this as quickly as possible because I don't want to drag it out for you, but just to give you a flavour. So this is a cafeteria, the Cafe Catani, which is in Bury St Edmunds town centre. And if you've got good eyesight, you'll note the chalkboard there is detailing Greek meals and Greek mezze and things like that. It's a Greek cafe, basically. Quite a small place, as you can see. It's just that one room. There is a little bit out back, but that's quite small as well. A little cosy cafe, and I am a reasonably regular visitor there because I like the food and I like the place. So it's somewhere I go to get away. So on one particular visit there, I just noted down a little mini observation of a variety of people coming in and out, their rough age group, and what they did. Now, clearly Maslow's hierarchy of physiological needs are people turning up to eat and drink and occasionally use the loo. They're meeting their physical needs, and that's an affordance of the place. It has a little kitchen area, it prepares food, so on. So that's the main reason people go in there. But as we all know, there are other reasons to go to a cafe beyond just shoveling food down your throat. So some people turn up and they read their book, they read their newspaper. Other people turn up with friends or with family. They meet people there, they socialise. There was one lady raking through a shopping bag, looking at her latest purchases and discussing them with some bloke who I assume was probably her husband. Somebody on the phone. There's all sorts of things you can do whilst you're in a cafe. And so cafes lend themselves to that. Now, you could think about the physicality of the place. So, as I said, it's quite a small venue. If somebody wanted to have a very private conversation that they didn't want overheard, then they certainly wouldn't go there because it's such a small place you can hear what other people are saying. They'd go to a different venue. They'd go to somewhere much larger where there's lots of noise and conversations get lost in the general banter and discussion going on. Likewise, if there was a very big group of you, you turned up with 20 of your friends in town, you wouldn't go to the Cafe Catani because you wouldn't fit in. It's not enough space for you to sit down. You'd go to a much bigger venue. Whereas if you just turned up with one friend or one relative, then Cafe Catani would be ideal because it is quite small, it's quite intimate. So it lends itself to certain types of activity, certain groups of people, and less so to other types of activity and other groups of people, purely due to the sort of physical structure of the place, the bricks and mortar of it. So you could think about factors like that. Just note, what do people do when they get there, possibly note how long they spend doing it, and jot a few notes about whether they appear to be male or female, roughly what age group you'd put them in, and roll with that information. And then start to think about the theories you want to bring in. So you could talk about Gibson's idea of affordances. It's, they serve food and drink, they've got toilet facilities. But it's also a warm place, a dry place, quite cosy. If it's raining or snowing or whatever, it's a bit of a grotty weather, you might well go in there just to chill. But they also have a few seats outside for the nice weather. So if you turned up on a really sunny day, you'd probably see a few people sitting on the outside tables. Well, not sitting on the tables, sitting on the chairs at the tables outside. It's a quiet little place, and the guy who works there, when I was there, he knew the names of several of the customers, and he certainly seen him knowing on the various other times I've been there. He doesn't know everybody's name, but he knows quite a few of them, which again would suggest familiarity, regular customers. He's seen them often enough to know their names and talk to them, chat to them. Now, some people might not like being known. They might prefer to go somewhere where no one knows who they are. But a lot of people do like the idea of community. They like to be able to go somewhere and you know the name of the staff. They know your name. They know the fact that you prefer coffee to tea or the other way around. They are familiar with you to a basic degree. They don't know the ins and outs of your life, but they have a certain level of familiarity with you. And that sense of community you could tie into Bauminster's idea of belongingness, for example, which you may well have touched on already in Louise's class, perhaps. And again, the kind of the process element, that regular visitations to a place helps with bonding. You feel more of a sense of liking a place if you've been there 10 times than if you've only been there once. So regularity implies there is a processing going on where people are bonding enough to that place that their names are known and their food and drink preferences are known. You might not get that in a much larger cafe, or a cafe that had a huge turnover of staff where the staff are never there long enough to get to know anybody's names. Whereas in this place, the same guy has been working there for years and years and years now. So there is that sense of belonging, a sense of kind of community element going on there. Mentioned that it's a Greek place. That could, bit tenuous, but could link into Prashansky's notion of identity. On the occasion I was there weren't any Greek customers when I did this observation, but I've seen people in and out there who do speak Greek. Presumably they are Greek. Maybe they go there because it's a bit of a kind of a community hub for them in a lot of ways. I guess there must be a fair few Greek people living in Bury St Edmunds to keep Greek places turning over. They also have British people, white people, black people, Asian people, etc. in and out there, people with American accents in and out there, all sorts of people coming and going. But perhaps an appeal for the Greeks. Appiah proposed a theory. We haven't touched on him in this class, but there's no reason why you can't look him up. Appiah proposed a theory that we are now in a much more cosmopolitan era, and that 60, 70 years ago, well, less than that actually, people were often very wary of foreign food. They're kind of suspicious of people from foreign parts of the world, whereas nowadays it's kind of taken for granted that you'll have Chinese takeaways or nip into an Indian restaurant or have pizza and pasta for dinner as a standard thing. Once upon a time, that would have been considered very unusual to have that much of a mixture of food, especially just after the war and the period of rationing and so forth. Whereas nowadays we are very cosmopolitan. You've got people from all over the world living in Britain, selling, making, trading food and drink and whatnot from different parts of the world. And a lot of people, well, probably most people I'd guess, are fairly open to the idea of one day we'll eat Greek food, the next day we'll eat Chinese food, the day after that we'll eat Indian food, and we'll sort of try different things. And it's become normalised, which is Appiah's notion of cosmopolitanness, and reflects a more open approach to life and to not just food and drink, but music, clothing, socialising with people from different ethnic backgrounds and communities. It's kind of reflective of that. So you could argue the fact that there is a little Greek cafe with a very mixed clientele coming in is symbolic of Appiah's theory of cosmopolitan identity. And going back to the Kaplans and their argument around attention restoration, the people in there, they look quite happy, quite jolly. They're chatting away or reading their books, looking quite content. It's a pleasant environment. Nobody appears overtly, or not on that occasion at any rate, appear distressed or anything like that. They all appear to be quite relaxed, and they left looking quite relaxed, quite happy, a little bit more relaxed than when they arrived, maybe, after a busy day at work or busy day shopping, whatever it was that they were getting up to. So again, you could look at the place you're observing and think, do people seem relaxed, or do they seem stressed? Maybe they look more miserable when they leave than when they arrive. Could go in either direction. But thinking about how people engage. So key summary points for you to bear in mind when you do your presentation on Thursday. Have your table, whether it's as a slide on the screen or as a printout sheet, either way is fine, showing your tally chart. Just read us through it quite briefly. Time, place, where you went to, when you went there, a brief overview of the data, and then the majority of time spent linking in the theory. Could be theories we've touched on in class, could be theories you've read about in books in your background research or journal articles or websites or whatever you found, but linking in those ideas and just tying them together. A little bit of Q&A at the end, nothing too horrific. I'll just ask you a little bit of ideas of anything you might have sort of missed out on in your presentation, just to sort of round it out a bit. And hopefully it will be an enjoyable experience for you. Any questions, just email them across. Thank you.